Richard Hills, and I'm sitting here at the organ of the Royal Albert Hall in London, one of the two largest organs, at least it is at this particular point in history, that we have in the UK. It's a very famous instrument, of course. It features very heavily in the BBC proms, particularly at the last night. So very much an orchestral organ. And in fact, if you look around the stops that we have here, you'll see that we have some very orchestral names. We have flutes and trumpets and clarinets, strings, as well as the core foundation stops that you would find on any church or cathedral organ. Now, it's bewildering sometimes to sit here and look at all of these different keyboards, or manuals as we call them, and these vast stop jams either side of me. But really, at its core, this is just like any keyboard instrument. We have more than one keyboard, but they all have different functions. They have different sounds which are playable, and I can also couple them together. And the other big difference, of course, from playing a piano or a single keyboard instrument is that down below we have the pedal board, which I play with my feet. Now, the pedal board is often used to provide the bass line of music, and in fact, the very longest and deepest notes of the organ are to be found in the pedal division. But the pedal board can also be used to put in different contrapuntal lines, orchestral lines, just about anything you want, really, so long as you've got the brain power and the spare foot to be able to do it. So why is this organ so big? Well, it's not just the case that more stops means more volume, although in many cases it does. It's more about variety. This organ has to play with orchestras a lot as part of its bread and butter work, and so it really needs to have quite a big main body of sound in order to keep up with the sheer volume put out by an orchestra. That's one of the reasons why it's quite large. So what makes this organ unique? Well, of course, every organ to some extent is unique because of the room in which it speaks. Every room has its own acoustical properties, and the organ speaks into it in a very specific way. But also, in a hall of this size and importance, it's really important to have an instrument that can give lots of variety, lots of different colour. So whereas on one church organ you may only have one or two flute sounds, there are rather a lot here, probably over a dozen different types of flute, all of different characters. For example, I've got some flutes up here on the top keyboard. I've got some here on the third keyboard, on the middle keyboard, and again on the bottom keyboard here. The main manual or keyboard that we have is this one here. It's called the Great Manual, and this is where we find many of the foundation stops that you will hear on a classical church organ. The bottom keyboard is called the Choir Manual or keyboard, and it has a lot of gentle accompanimental sounds, such as these beautiful strings. Now, quite often an organ will have some strings on its third keyboard, but we have a whole string division here, which sounds like this. And a lot of colourful orchestral stops as well. So, for example, here's a cor anglais, and a clarinet, and an oboe, an orchestral oboe. And as I say, those are duplicated, not exactly, but there are other string stops around the organ too, for example, here on the third keyboard. On the top keyboard. And we even have a string stop here on the great keyboard. So if I couple them all together, then you'll start to get an idea of how we mix the various different colours together in order to create the sounds which we want. Let's see how this sounds. One of the great joys of this particular organ is its brass division, or its reed department as we would call it in the business. And those are the very trumpety, trombony stops that we have. And we have batteries of them all over the place, really, from the quieter ones, which are up here. Those are also enclosed, as we call it, in a box, and I can control the volume of them by pulling back on the central pedal here with my right foot, and you'll hear the difference in the sound as I essentially close the doors in front of them. In the same department we have a slightly bigger set. We have some down on the bottom keyboard here. Whole set up here on the great keyboard. There's one. There's two. There's three, and tutti is really rather impressive. Now, if you think that's all we've got, you would be mistaken, because that's only just getting started. We also have in its own bombard division cornopian stop, which sounds like this. Searing orchestral trumpet, which is very bright and brash. A stop which is well known to many organists called tuba. And if you really want to go crazy, you've got the tuba mirabilis, the wonderful tuba as it means in Latin. So if you were to be extravagant and put them all together, then it might give an effect somewhat like this, and I'm going to put some pedal in to underpin it, and let's have a listen to how we're getting on here. Really, really very impressive, and that's just the reed stops. Now, also looking around the organ, you can see that there are various numbers on the stops, and that tells us how long the longest pipe is in that particular stop. Obviously, the longer the pipe, the lower the pitch it produces. So something like a 2 foot, as we call it, 2 foot long stop, which means that bottom C, in theory, is 2 feet long. By the time we get up to the top of the keyboard, is really very high, and testing your speakers, or in some cases your hearing, because some of these can get really very high indeed. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have on the pedals stops which are 32 feet in length. So the bottom note of these stops here, for example, and they're in the case, they're the famous case pipes that you see, play at 32 foot pitch like this. Now those are flute pipes or flue pipes, but when we really want to be impressive, we put the reed sounds, those brassy sounds, at the lower pitches. And this is cataclysmic in the room and a wonderful effect when combined with full orchestra. As an aside, the number 8 foot pitch, is the pitch that we normally associate with the piano pitch or concert pitch. So middle C there, for example, is the same as middle C on a piano when we draw stops with 8 foot pitch. So that's one of the reasons that we can make such a big sound, because if we put in stops which play an octave lower, anything that's marked 16, together with the 8s, 4, which plays an octave higher, 2, an octave higher still, and then what we call mixture stops, which are stops which don't necessarily play a specific pitch in terms of 8, 16, 8 and 4, but they do emphasize the overtones. So we have a mixture here which will play the 19th, 22nd, 26th and 29th notes above those being played to emphasize the upper harmonics. And the various combinations of those are what really give the top end of the frequency range to the organ, to the pipe organ sound. So if we start combining things together, we can really find out how impressive these things can start sounding. So this is just flues and a few reed sounds and some pedal. I'm going to add in some reeds now to the grate. More reeds and bigger pedal. There's one thing I haven't mentioned yet, which is we find some percussion instruments as well in the organ specification. You don't find this very often, and it's one of the things that contributes to the special character of this instrument. So down here on the pedal, we have a bass drum, and it's a real bass drum, which is hit with a pneumatic hammer. Every organ should have one. And up here on the solo department, we have tubular bells. And we also have a stop called carillons, which, in spite of its name, is not bells. It's actually an orchestral celesta. And by flipping a switch down here, I can turn it into a vibraphone. Not something you see very often. So it all sounds bewildering, but really when you think about it as being a giant keyboard instrument or a giant piano with lots of different variety of sound, then it starts to make a bit more sense. Now, the difficult thing, of course, is exploring all of that sound and all of that colour, because this hall is so busy that it's very rare that one gets the opportunity to sit here and just go through all of these different sounds and, of course, the hundreds, thousands of different combinations of stops that you can put together. And really, it's like a painter's palette in terms of sound. You can change it according to your whim. You can find various different ways of creating the same effect, but with a slightly different colour. The degrees of nuance and the possibilities that we have here are really incredible. And all of that sums up to make the incredible instrument which is the Royal Albert Hall organ.